Good evening. Daf Yomi for the month is sponsored by the Durbach, Abudi, and Mandel families in honor of the engagement of Shol Harris Mira Mandel. They build a Bayis Neman, B'Yisrael, filled with Torah, Simcha, and Bracha. Daf Yomi for the week, sponsored by Aaron and Evelyn Kaslasi, B'Zchus Refuah Shlema for Chana Bas Bruria. And today being Wednesday, the Daf is sponsored by Jeffrey and Chava Bela Wall, Le'ilui Nishmas, Jeff's aunt, Bluma Bas Menachem Mendel, whose yahrzeit is today. We are in a new parak. Sameches, Amud Bey's very top, Mishnah says, Ben Sora Umora. This category of people who get skila, one of them is the Ben Sora Umora. What is that? So, Me'emasai Nase Ben Sora Umora. At what point does a person become a wayward and rebellious son? Mishiyavi Shtei Saros. He has to be at the age at which he has two pubic hairs, and until he has a full beard. Now, when we say full beard, we mean hatachton v'lo ha'elyon. We're talking about pubic hair, not facial hair, because why do we call it a beard then? Our rabbis always talk in a nice way, right? They don't use bad, vulgar speech, so that's why they say shenemar. Pasuk says, ki ish ben, right? When a person has a son, so it means a ben velobas. Means he has to be a son, not a daughter. Ben velo ish says ben velo ish has to be a son, not an adult. So a katan is potter, and a child, of course, would be too young altogether. Shilabal l'chol mitzvos, because they are not involved in mitzvos. So it has to be at least somebody who's adult enough to be obligated in mitzvos. So 2 hairs is be required, but not old enough that they are a full-fledged adult, because it has to be a ben and not an ish. Says the Gemara, Koton minalan de potter. So a child, how do you know that he's going to be exempt? Minalan, what do you mean from where? Kedikhtani time, the Mishnah already explained the reason. Mitzvos, because he has no obligation in mitzvos. V'tu, and furthermore, Heicha ashkechon da'onish hakosov, dehachali baikro lemifterei. Where in the Torah would we ever find such a concept that somebody who is a child would ever get punished? We never see such a thing. So why would this question even make sense? So the answer is, Anon hachi kamrin. This is our question. Atu ben sora mora alchet onerog. Does a ben sora or mora get killed because he's done some kind of avera that is worthy of death sentences? No. He stole some food and he ate some food. So his crime is not severe enough that he should be killed. But why is he killed? Al shem sofo nerog. He's killed, as we'll learn, because of what eventually will happen, right? He's abused his character already to such a point that he's going to do terrible things when he grows up.
Even though he stole food, maybe he was very hungry.
We're going to see that he becomes gluttonous as a result, and he becomes the sort of a character who has bad character traits. He's going to wind up killing people, right? So now, if that's the case, since we're killing him now because of what he will eventually become, afilu katanami, so then we might think that you should do that to the child also. Maybe he's just dangerous, like you kill an animal if they are dangerous. So this person becomes a dangerous person. So maybe even if they're a child, you'd kill him. And furthermore, Ben Veloish says in the pasuk that he should be a son and not an adult. So I might think Kotan Mashma, that sounds like a child. So Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Rav, Damar Kra, pasuk says Ki Leish Bain. When a man has a son, which means Ben Hasamach Legvura Social Ish, it means a son who is close to the age of manhood, right? That's why you're going to read that pasuk.
You mean like 12 years old?
He has to 13, right? Because he has to have Shtei Saros. Once he's 13 years old, but not an actual minor. Ve'ad sheyakif zaken tachton, so until he has the pubic hairs. So Tanari Rabbi Chia ad sheyakif atara. So Rabbi Chia explains that it is until the upper portion of his member is covered with hair, but doesn't have to be so that even the scrotum or all those areas are also covered by hair, which comes later on. Kiyasa Rav Dimi Amar hakafas gid below hakafas beitzim. That's what Rav Dimi explained that it means. It's the hair surrounding the actual member, but not actually the testicles as well. So Amar Rav Chisda says Katan sheholid es beno. He says if a child has a son, so Eino Nasa Ben Sora Mora, so then he can't be a Ben Sora Mora if he has a child already. So if he's somebody who's 13 years old, who's already had a child, then he's too can't be his ben Sor, he's disqualified. Shnamar, because the pasuk says, Ki yeh li'ish bein, when a man has a son, li'ish bein v'lo ben bein. He has to be somebody, an adult. When there has to be an adult who has a child, not if he is a child himself who has a child.
Would they get a bear for having a child at 13?
No, not necessarily, right? It doesn't have right. Well,
legal age usually.
Well, there's no legal age in the Torah, right? Legal age is bar mitzvah, right? Once you're bar mitzvah, you can be married.
Past your puberty or whatever it is.
That's correct. So, Hami Bailech Rav Yehuda, but 1 second, Amarav. This pasuk Leish Bain, we already used for a drasha that we had above. That it has to be a child who is close to the age of adulthood. So, Imkain, if that is the only drasha that we would learn from that, so then Lema Kra, the pasuk could say, Ki yeh ben Leish, when there is a son to a man. My ki yeh leish bain. Why does it say ki yeh leish bain, where the word ish is first? Shma mino lichad Rav Chisda. That tells me what Rav Chisda says, that it has to be that a man has a son, not a son has a son. Ve'ema kulei lahachi huda. So maybe the whole pasuk is telling me Rav Chisda's drasha, not Rav Yehuda Marav's drasha at all. So in Cain, nema kra, if that was the case, then the pasuk would say ben ish. He has to be the son of a man, not the son of a son. So my leish. Why Leish Bain? Why does it say Leish Bain? Shmaminot Tarti. This tells me I can learn both drushos. That if he has a son, if the father has to be an adult when the child is born, and also that it has to be a child who is close to the age of adulthood. Upliga de Rabba. Now, this idea, the concept that there's such a thing as a child having a child, right? The father might have been a minor himself. Doesn't exist according to all Shitas, right? Who says you can even have a child when you're that young? So it argues with what Rabbi says. Rabbi says, Katon Einamoli. According to Rabbi, a child can't even have a child, right? If you're under 13, you are not capable of having children. Therefore, there would be no need for a pasuk to tell me that the father has to be an adult before the child can become a ben Sor or Mora, because you couldn't ever have a case that would be otherwise. Shenamar, as the pasuk says, Im ein liish goel, right? In a circumstance where somebody steals from a convert. So if somebody steals from a convert, normally if somebody steals, they have to return their item that they stole in order to get tshuva. If the person dies, they have to return it to their heirs. What if the person is a convert? So then, we'll say first of all, if this person has nobody to return it to, he has no relatives to return it to, then it goes to the Kohanim. So, how could it possibly be a circumstance that the person has no relatives? After all, everybody's got a cousin, right? All Jewish people are related to each other in some way. So there's no circumstance in which a Jewish person can have no relatives. Ella begezel ger hakasam medaber. The answer here is we're talking about the item that was stolen was from a convert. The Amar Rahman of the pasuk says, Samach Tesman Aleph. Amar Rahman of the pasuk says, Ish atatzarch lachzor alav. If the person says that has to be if a man has no relatives, which tells me that a man, if he's an adult, you have to check to make sure that he has no relatives, because he could have had children. However, in Yesh,
what if he was adopted and he didn't have any children through adoption? Brothers through adoption.
Well, we're talking about there's a convert, right? Okay. So we don't. I mean, it doesn't matter where he came from, because he is not related to any of his father, mother, or any of those relatives anyway, now that he's converted. The only way for him to be related to anybody is for him to have had children, right? But now we don't know if he has children. So all we know is that somebody stole from him. So the first thing you have to do is, if you have an adult ger, is you have to investigate, find out that if he had children, right? So im yesh lo gevim lav, but you have to, if he's an adult, you have to find out if he had children or not. However, koton, if he is a minor, right? This ger is 12 years old, so you have to tzarch lachzor alav. You don't have to go searching to investigate whether he has heirs. Biaduah she'ein lo goalin. It's clear, based on the fact that he is a minor, that he has no relatives. So therefore, this is the argument: can a person who's under 13 have children or not? So that is our discussion. Eisvei Abaye. So Abaye asked one question: Ish, a man, in li ella ish. So this pasuk says that if a man, so if he has relations with a woman, shichvas zera. Pasuk says ish ki yishkav es isha shichvas zera. Right. So a man has relations with a woman and he releases seed. Okay. So this is a circumstance of what's called a shivcha charufa. She is a a woman who is not Jewish, who is a maid, who is a servant, who gets promised to an Eved Ivri. So since she's promised to an Eved, he's not allowed to have relations. The pasuk is telling us he's not allowed to have relations with her. So pasuk says ish, saying liela ish means that no man is allowed to have relations. Ben tes shanav yomechad shiroi libia minayin. So how do I know also to include somebody who is also would be prohibited if it's a person who is 9 years old, that he is able to have relations. Talmud Lomar ve'ish. There's an extra vav there. The extra vav tells me not only does this prohibition apply to men, but it also applies to a child who is 9 years old and above. So Amar Le Yeshlo. So the question is, one second, how can you wind up having a circumstance? You just told me that somebody who's a below bar mitzvah cannot have children. Then how did you wind up in this pasuk? V'ish ki yishkav es isha shechvas zera. How is there shechvas zera if she can't have any children? So it must be that he could have children. So the answer is no. It doesn't mean that he can have children. Yeshlo ve'eno molid. He has the ability to have shechvas zera, but he doesn't have the ability to have children. Because what is it like? It's kitvu shelo hivia shlish dami. It's like when you plant a kernel of grain that didn't grow it more than a third of its way, where it will be, you have such a seed, but it will never sprout, right? So a person cannot actually, he has the ability to have relations, but he cannot have any children from those relations. Dvei Chizkiya Tana, they learn the brises of Chizkiya. Ki v'chi yazid ish. This is talking about a person committing murder, but it uses an interesting phrase. It says when a person will become yazid. So the word yazid, Rashi says means, here the Gemara is understanding it to mean mevashel, means to cook. So that means a man, right? A man can cook, meaning he can actually, his reproductive system works. Ish mezid umazriya, a person can cook and he can impregnate. Vein katan mezid umazriya, but that is not the case when it comes to people who are under bar mitzvah. Under bar mitzvah cannot have children. Amar le Rav Mordechai le Ravashi. So Mordechai says to Ravashi, "My mashma dahay mezid nishal dibeshulehu." Where do you see that this is an interesting phrase you're using? You're using the word mezid to mean that he is able to cook, right? The word cook means mezid. The pasuk says, "Vayazid Yaakov nazid." When Yaakov was making lentil soup because his grandfather had passed, Avram had passed away, and was making lentil soup for Yitzchak, and Esav comes back from the field. So that cooking is described as Vayazid Yaakov nazid, from the word mezid yazid, and so therefore it means to cook. Now, v'hat tanan b'rishmal. We learn in a brayso of the yeshiva Rishmal, ben velo av. So, pasuk says,
son but not father.
Right, there has to be a son and not a father, right? This person, that means that the ben sorer mora, as we said before, he has to be a ben sorer mora. The father has to be an adult. Now we're saying that he has not only that, but he has to be a ben sorer mora. He has to be a son. If the Ben Sora Mora himself was a father, meaning he, the Ben Sora Mora, himself had children already, so then he couldn't be a Ben Sora Mora. That's going to disqualify him from being a Ben Sora Mora. Now, Hechidami, how can you possibly have a circumstance where a Ben Sora Mora has a child? Ilema di over baser de isi saros. If you say that maybe he had relations with a woman after he was already had 2 hairs, after he was already 13. Ve'olid makmi delakiv zakim, and that means that the child had to have been born before he's got full pubic hair, because after all, once he gets to the mole zakim, so then he's no longer in the category of a ben sora mora anymore. He's too old. So how long is that? Mi ika shahus kulehai. You don't have that long in that state, because Vaha Amar Reb Krus Bedai said, Kol Yamav shel ben sora mora ena ela gimel chadashim bilvad. The entire period of time that a person can be a ben sora mora is 3 months, right? From shtei saros to mali zakin is only 3 months. So therefore, if he got a girl pregnant after he was 13, then the child wouldn't be born for another 9 months. He'd already be too old.
If the child's born, does that mean you have to marry her, right?
No, he's his daughter. Right,
the girl who gets the boy who gets the 13-year-old who gets the girl pregnant.
If the 13-year-old gets the girl pregnant, so then they don't have to be married. They don't have to stay married. Only if it's right. The only time you have to have a circumstance where he has to be married is if it's an assault case, right?
What happens with the child? Do they keep the child, or what happens with the child?
The child is theirs, right? It's a regular child. Whoever wants to raise the child, right? I mean, theoretically, he could even be married to this girl, right? He's 13 years old. He could marry her, right? We're just pointing out that he can't be a ben sora mora now that he has this child. But we have this logistical problem because there's no circumstance in which a Ben Sorah can actually have a child. So the answer must be Elalav di Aber Makmi Delaisi Shte Saros. He must have gotten her pregnant before he was 13. So now the Olid Makmi Delakiv Zakin, so that way the child is born before he becomes old enough to grow out of being a Ben Sorah. So Shma Mina Katan Molid. So that would prove the idea that a child could, in fact, have children, because he'd be getting her pregnant when he was 12 and a half, so the child would be born before he was 13 and 3 months. No, not true. The Olam di Aber Basar Daisi Shte Saros. Really, what happened is he got the girl pregnant after he was already 13 years old. The Oli Basar Dakiv Zakin. And the child is born later, after already. He already has the hairs after he has a makbali zakin. Udikakasha Rabbi Krus Bedoy. And as far as your question, as far as Rabbi Krus Bedoy is concerned, that already that's going to be 6 months too late. He also Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, Amar, he explained Amri b'Marava, that they said in Eretz Yisrael, Ben velo haroi likroso av. It has to be a son, not somebody who is appropriate to be a father. Meaning, he doesn't actually have to have the kid yet. The kid doesn't have to be born, but the kid, he has to be able to be old enough that he would be able to have a child that he impregnated somebody with. And at 1/3 of the pregnancy, somebody is able to, the pregnancy begins to show. Therefore, it's possible that he would be able to have a woman who is 3 months pregnant. Well, he's still within the 3-month period of being a Ben Sorah Mora.
And you can tell it's growing.
And you can tell it's growing. So therefore, that's what it means. It doesn't mean that he's actually a father, but he has the ability to be at a stage in which he has a pregnant girl from him who's 1/3 of the way pregnant.
So then they call him the father already.
That would call him the father, exactly, even though he's the father. Right, exactly. Gufa. Okay, so now let's go back to the statement. Amar Reb Krus Bedoy. Reb Krus Bedoy had said, Amar Reb Shabsai, in the name of Reb Shabsai, Kol Yomov Shel Ben Sorah Mora Einan L'Gil Chadashim. The entire time period of a person being able to become a Ben Sorah Mora is only 3 months. Bilvad, only, right? V'hanan Tanan. But 1 second, we learned in a Mishnah, Mishiyavi Seish Saros Shiyakif Zakein. So it says in our Mishnah that it's from the time he has 2 hairs until the time that he has full pubic hair. So Hekif Zakein. So which is it? Is it the 3 months or is it based on the pubic hair? So the answer is Hikif Zakin, if he has the full pubic hair, if that happens before 3 months, so then whichever comes first. Maluz Gimel Chadashim, Afagav de Hikif Zakin, whichever comes first. It's the 3 months or the pubic hair, whichever comes first, that's what releases him from the ability to become a Ben Sorah Umoreh. So Hekif Zakin after lived Gimel Chadashim, Gimel Chadashim, Afagav Hikif. Okay, great. So Yosef Rabbi Yaakov, Narpikod. Rabbi Yaakov from Narpikod asked the following question: Kamei de Ravina in front of Ravina. Yosef Ekamer Mishmei de Rav Huna, and he sat and he said in front of Rav, in the name of Rav Huna, Brei Rav Yeshua. Shma mina midivrei Krus Bedoy. You learn from what Rav Krus Bedoy says, right? His source is 3 months. How come 3 months? Because that's at which point that the child is going to be born after 9 months. It's a third already into the second term, so the child is visible. So you could see from what Rav Krus Bedoy says, Amar Rav Shabsai in the name of Rav Shabsai, that Yoledes l'shiva, that there are circumstances. Gemara always talks about there's 2 gestational periods for babies. Either they're born after 9 months or they can be born after 7 months. Now, the nature of a pregnancy, that the child can be born after, if it's born during the 8th month, so the baby's not going to live. That's what the Gemara says. So therefore, it can either be born after 7 months or after 9 months.
So after 7 months, that's premature, basically.
They're going to call that term, right? They're going to say it's possible. We call it premature because we always say that full term is 9 months. But the Gemara has this category of children that are born after 7 months, which also are considered to be full term. But now, if that baby is born after 7 months, so ein ubra nikar l'shlish yameha, then it must be that is the entire pregnancy basically a shortened pregnancy? And so, therefore, the baby is 1/3 of the way at 2 months and a third, 2 1/3 months, or does it follow the regular pregnancy proceedings at 3 months? Then the child is already large enough that you can tell. So you could see from Krus Bedoy says that even if the pregnancy is going to be a 7-month pregnancy, so then the child is not going to be recognized at 1/3 of the time. Because because if you're going to tell me that the trimesters are going to go by the thirds, so then Lama Li Gimel, So then why would he be off the hook? He's potentially become a father after 3 months. Bitreyu tilusasagi. He'd be able to be a father, theoretically, after 2 months and a third. Because if it's a 7-month pregnancy, then first term of pregnancy is 2 1/3. So shows us that even if it's a 7-month pregnancy, it's not going to be considered to be visible until after 3 months. So he says, no, Amar Lei Liolam Imalach Ubra Nikar Lishlish Yamah. No, maybe not. Maybe it's true that after a third of the time the pregnancy would be visible, and you could see the child after 2 1/3 months. But here, why do we not consider that to be the circumstance? Because remember, there's no real child here. We're just saying that he is capable of having a child, and in this circumstance, Zil Basa Ruba. We're going to go after the majority. Most pregnancies are not 7-month pregnancies. Most pregnancies are 9-month pregnancies. So therefore, we're going to only be concerned for the potential that it's a 9-month pregnancy, and after a third of the way is going to be 3 months. Amrua Kamid Rav Huna, brother of Yeshua. They said this in front of Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua. Amar Lahu, he said to them, what are you telling me? You're going to go after the majority and kill this person? Meaning, if it's possible that he could be a father earlier, you're going to tell me, no, let's presume he's not a father, because in the majority of cases, he wouldn't be able to be a father. And that means that if he becomes a Ben Sora Mora after 2.5 months, we're going to kill him. Well, 1 second. HaTorah Amra, the Torah says, V'shaftu ha'eda v'itzilu ha'eda. The Torah tells you that you're supposed to judge the congregation and save him, meaning we always give, in cases of capital punishment, the benefit of the doubt. So therefore, how are we going to kill a person based on a majority? You said we're going to go after the majority? We should go, the Torah is telling us to give the benefit of the doubt. So they went and they asked this question before Ravina. Amar Le, he said to him, what are you talking about? Of course we go after the majority. You're right, you're supposed to give we're supposed to look for ways to get somebody off the hook, but that doesn't mean if you have a majority of cases, we're not going to follow the majority. Vehatnan, I'll show you a Mishnah. Mishnah says, Echad Omer b'shnayim b'chodesh ve'echad Omer b'gimel. Let's say we had this case of witnesses to a capital case. One says that the event happened on the 2nd day of the month. One says the 3rd of the month. Eduson kayemes. We're going to say that testimony is still valid, even though they testified that it occurred in 2 different days. Why is that testimony valid? It must be that they made a mistake. One person knew when Rosh Chodesh was, and one person didn't know that they had declared Rosh Chodesh on the earlier day, and he just mixed up the days of the month. Okay? But that's what happened. Now, if you're going to tell me you don't go by the majority, he says, ahadodi. He says, well, what's your basis? The majority of people make a mistake and forget the day, and therefore you're going to kill the guy based on the majority? Well, if you're telling me you don't go after the majority, then say in this circumstance, these people didn't make a mistake, and therefore the testimony is contradictory, and we have to let the guy off the hook. Ella lav mishum damrin zil basaru. But we must be saying in that Mishnah that you're going to go after the majority. And since this is an easy mistake for people to make, the majority of people could make that mistake. Most people could make such a mistake in not knowing what day of the month it is. So therefore, we're going to kill the person and consider that to be valid testimony. So to here, most of the children that are born are going to be 9-month children, and therefore they were presuming that he wouldn't be considered a father until 3 months in, and so therefore, if he commits the acts of Ben Sora Mora 2.5 months after he has Shtei Saros, we're going to kill him, because we're going to go after Rov. Amar Rabbi Yirmi Medifti. Rabbi Yirmi Medifti says, Af ananami tnina, we also have this idea in a Mishnah. Bas shol shana v'yom echad miskadeshes bebia. Once a girl is 3 years old and one day, she's considered to be physically capable of relations, and therefore, practically, as far as halacha is concerned, we can have several different ramifications. Number one,
kind of young.
Yes, very young. I would not recommend it. Right, just saying that it is halachically legal. So therefore, if the father marries off the girl, right, marries off his daughter, and somebody has relations with her, so she can be married with that. If she was already married to another person, and then the person dies and the brother marries her, so the brother has relations with her, so that's going to be a yibum, and it also is a valid marriage.
At the same time, if the 3-year-old gets pregnant, wouldn't it be hard on the body?
She doesn't say she couldn't be pregnant. Right? We didn't say she could be pregnant. That's going to come up. We're going to discuss that. It just means that the relations is considered to be halachically valid relations as far as making her married. Okay? V'chayav and allow mishum eshes ish, right? So we had the same thing with men, by the way. We said a boy's ability to have relations is at 9 years old in one day, but he couldn't. We just learned that he couldn't have children until 13, right? So v'chayav and allow mishum eshes ish. Also, if a man has relations with her and she's married, so then he's going to be violating the prohibition of having relations with a married woman. So we discussed that she's able, if she's a nida, so then she could make her husband, or the person who has a relation with her, tameh, to the point where he becomes a avatuma, that whatever he touches becomes a rishon latuma. Right. Otherwise, normally, if somebody comes in contact with a nida, doesn't have bia, but he just comes in contact with, he becomes a rishon l'tuma. But if he has bia with somebody who's a nida, he becomes a rishon. He becomes an avatuma. So this considered bia.
Is that until he goes to the mikvah, or even when
until he goes to until he go? Well, he's going to be for 7 days. He has to wait 7 days, right?
The mikvah, right?
And then he has to go. So therefore, nises lekohen. If she marries a kohen, ochelas betruma, so she can eat truma. Ba leha echa min apsulin. If somebody who she's not allowed to have relations with, a mamzer, for example, or nosin, one of those circumstances, has relations with her, so then pasla minakuna, he's going to invalidate her from being able to marry a kohen later. If any of the prohibited relations has relations with her, mumsin aleha, they could be killed as a result of having relations with her. Vehi p'tur, but of course she would be exempt. Why? So why would she be exempt? Because she is too young, right? So now we turn the page, Ve'amai. Now, question is like this. Why is it that we're considering her to be a married woman based on these relations? Ema ailonis he. Why don't we say that there's a potential that she could grow up to not be able, right? There's a certain type of, sometimes there are people who never are able to never become physically mature. They never hit puberty. They can never become mature. That's called an ailonis, and they can never have children. The halacha is if somebody marries a woman who is young, and then she grows up and turns out that she's an ailonis, the marriage is retroactively invalid because of what we call mekach tos.
What happens if you have a relationship and you realize that the women can't have any children?
So the relations is fine, right? But you're not considered to be married later on, retroactively, right? The marriage is not a valid marriage because he wouldn't have married her had he known she was in fact an ailonis. So therefore, the question is that so she's an ailonis, and the marriage never would have taken place had he known such a thing. So therefore, how is it that somebody who has relations with her after she's married is going to get killed for being an eshes ish, when in fact we don't know she's really married? We won't know she's married until she becomes 12 years old, and then we can find out that the marriage is actually valid. So the answer is because we go after the majority. That's the majority of cases, is the woman's going to grow up, she's going to become mature, and the marriage is going to be valid. And therefore, we're killing a person based on majority. Who most women are not an ailonis. Therefore, the marriage is presumed to be valid based on the majority, and that means the man is going to get the death sentence based on that presumed majority. So we prove again, majority does rule when it comes to misa. So no, lo. My chayiv aleha dikatani. What does it mean when the Mishnah says that you're going to be liable for this circumstance? We're going to say dikatani korban. We're only going to be make him liable if he does it b'shogeg, right? If this person, let's say, for example, has relations with this girl b'shogeg, then he's going to bring a sacrifice. A sacrifice you can do based on the rov, but not misa. Now, 1 second. V'ham mumsin al yadok tani. It says here, we just read that there was a circumstance where if she has relations with a relative, then a prohibited relative, then we're going to kill that person. So therefore,
which korban do you give?
A korban chatas. There's a korban chatas, right? We're talking about. So aleha aviha. The answer is we're talking about a circumstance where the father has relations with her. That is for sure an isur. It has nothing to do with marriage. We're not talking about that somebody had relations with her and she was married, and therefore the prohibition of having relations with her in some way relates to the marriage. We're just talking about a plain person who cannot have relations with her, and if he does, those are relations that he can have misa based on it, but it's not going to be based on a rov. 1 second, though, it doesn't say the father. It says any of the prohibitions that are in the Torah, which sounds like we're talking about even the ones through marriage, like a father-in-law or like anybody who has relations with her because she's a married woman. Ella, what are we dealing with here? de kabla ilave. We must be talking about, it's not a simple answer, but it must be that the person, when he married this girl, said that even if she's an eyelidness, I want to be married to her. And so therefore, then the marriage is valid, and then anybody who has relations with her afterwards is having relations with a married woman, and you can kill based on that because it's not based on the rove, it's based on a real marriage. Okay, so again, this doesn't prove that you can kill somebody based on the rove. Okay, now, next case. Let's say a woman is molesting a child, okay, a small child, and they have the beginning of relations. So Beis Shammai says posla min hakahuna. By doing that, since it's her son, so she has invalidated herself from being able to marry a Kohen ever, because she becomes the concept of zona. She's had prohibited relations, and that ruins her ability to be married to a Kohen ever.
Well, why would she molest her own son?
Because she's a sick person, right? Unfortunately, we have these circumstances where people abuse children, and that's not a good situation. Right?
Just one thing that bothers me in this.
So just one, okay?
Yes. It's more on the philosophical level, right? Like halachically, you're discussing the Gemara, but before that, the Gemara is so careful about relationship between a Jew and another Jew, and therefore we have all these judgments and everything.
Yes.
And then here we have a 3-year-old girl that's considered a wife.
Yes.
Without having any sechel whatsoever.
Correct.
So, I mean,
we give the right.
We're so concerned about understanding each other and the relations, and then a marriage with a 3-year-old doesn't
make sense. It's not easy, right? You would have to understand and appreciate, I guess, the idea. Yeah, basically the question that you're asking is, how is it that the Torah has such a concept that a father is allowed to marry off his underage daughter to somebody, right?
Yeah.
And it's not a real easy answer in society's values that we have now. There's no good way to be able to judge such a thing. In previous generations, I suppose, you don't want women to not be able to be within a family unit, because they weren't able to find jobs easy. It wasn't like, the society now where people are protected. If you had a woman living by herself, or particularly a child living by herself, then it could be dangerous. It could be dangerous for that girl. So it's better for somebody to offer situations where they can marry somebody into another family, even when she's a child. So that's essentially what I look at, as they're just basically handing off the child to adoption to somebody else or whatever. But that doesn't necessarily mean, as far as Bia is concerned, that makes that legal. So it is there are a lot of good childless there, right? So that's the basic bottom line, is it's not so simple.
It's also like, what I'm saying is that this is the foundation of the Jewish people.
Yes.
The wife of her husband.
Yes.
And then we have a wife that doesn't have
any das or anything. That's correct. She's not making her own decisions. Correct. It's a fair question. I wonder if anybody talks about it. I'll see if I can take a look about seeing why such a marriage is. Yeah. It's not so simple, but the issue that we're dealing with is halachic, right? In nature, saying that having relations. What basic bottom line is, we're saying that there is a significance to relations at that age, right? Whether that's a good thing to do, the Gemara is not saying that's a good thing to do, right? It's saying that is halachically significant.
Yeah.
Okay, so now Beis Hillel says machshirin. Beis Hillel says that it is that she's not unacceptable to marry kuna, and what is basically based on is whether having relations with this child is real relations or not. So Rabbi Chia Brei Rava Bar Nachmani. So Rabbi Chia, the son of Rav Bar Nachmani, says Amar Rav Chisda, the name of Rav Chisda, Amri La, Amar Rav Chisda, is Rav Chisda, Amar Zeiri, Hakol Modim. Everyone agrees here that Ben Tesha Shanim V'Yom Echad Shabia Sobia. Everyone agrees that a 9-year-old, and again, not appropriate to do, but a 9-year-old is able to have relations. Everyone agrees that if he was less than 8 years old, they wouldn't be able to have relations. The argument is an 8-year-old. Beis Shammai says we can learn from earlier generations that it's possible to have relations at 8 years old, and therefore, since that's possible, even though nowadays we said they can't have any children until they're 13, since such relations existed, that means those relations are considered halachically valid, and therefore that contact, that abuse, is going to create a damage to the woman that she cannot marry a Kohen. Ubeis Hillel Savri Lo Gamrin Midor Shishon. Beis Hillel says that maybe have been the case at one point historically, that people were able to have children when they were at a younger age, but that is not the case nowadays, and therefore it's not considered relations.
Where's the they can't have any children? I mean, the body's not ready to have children, or their body...
Correct.
Even with the relationship, they still can't have any children or whatever.
Correct. Now, so now the ish question is, Vidoros Rishon Minolan de Olid. Where do we see that previous generations were able to have children when they were 8 years old? So we have a few different potential stories. The pasuk says, "V'halozos basheva bas Eliam, Ashes Uriah." So in the case of David, so there was a girl named Basheva. She was the daughter of Eliam, who was the wife of Uriah, Hachiti. Then it says Eliam ben Achitofel Hagiloni. Eliam was the son of Achisophel, okay, who was David, happens to be David's advisor. Okay, so Bathsheba was the granddaughter of Achitophel. Uksiv, then it says, who was also the mother of Shlomo, right? So Shlomo's mother is Bathsheba, Bathsheba's father is Eliam, and Eliam's father is Achisophel. Okay, those are the relationships? Good. Now it says, Vayishlach biyad Nasan Hanavi, Vayikra Shemo Yedidya, Bavor Ki Hashem. Then we now have fast forward a little bit into history, and Nasan Hanavi says that David's son's name should be Yedidya, that's Shlomo. Shlomo's name was Yedidya, and because he was the one in service of Hashem, so that means Shlomo Melech is born. Now, during the time that Shlomo Melech is born, Uksiv, the pasuk says, Vahilu Shnasaim Yamim, right 2 years after Shlomo was born, Vayu Gozim L'Avshalom. Avshalom, the story happens, Avshalom has these sheep shearers. That's the story where Avshalom fights with Amnon and kills Amnon, David's other son. And as a result, Avshalom is exiled. So,
was it like an accidental death, or was it on purpose? No,
it was a purpose. It was they had a dispute and a fight where Avshalom is defending his sister, etc. Uksiv, the pasuk says, "V'Avshalom barach." Avshalom runs away. Vayelech Geshura. He runs away to a place called Geshur, and Vayisham Sholoshim. He's there for 3 years. Uksiv, then it says, "Vayashav Avshalom b'Yerushalayim shnasaim yamim." He goes back to Yerushalayim eventually, and he stays in Yerushalayim for 2 years. Upnei Melech lo ra'ah, but he never goes back to David Melech. He's afraid he's going to be into trouble. So now, Uksiv, then the pasuk says, so now that Vayhimi case arba'im shana, after 40 years, not 40 years from the time of King David's reign, because King David only reigned for 40 years, but 40 years after the Jewish people asked for a king. So it only took 40 years before the first rebellion against David HaMelech. So 37 years into David HaMelech's reign. Vayomer Avshalom el HaMelech, and Avshalom said to the king, Ilchana ve'ashlama es nidarai. He says, I'm going to go and I'm going to fulfill my vows. He made a pretext to go to Yerushalayim, and he left David HaMelech, and he then gathered together a whole bunch of people in order to be able to create some kind of rebellion against David. So he's going to go to Hebron in order to make his sacrifices, but in fact he was really starting a rebellion. Uksiv, then it says, so Avshalom does this. Now this is when Avshalom meets David HaMelech. So remember that Shlomo was born, just to be able to remember the chronology. Shlomo was born, then comes 2 years, then 3 more years where he's in exile, then 2 more years where he's back in Yerushalayim. So this story, the rebellion of Avshalom, happens when Shlomo is 7 years old. Okay, that's the basic bottom line. Shlomo is 7 years old during Avshalom's rebellion. Uksiv, then it says, V'achitofa ra ki lo nesta atzaso. So David Melech is chased out by Avshalom. The rebellion is successful. David Melech is on the run. So then David Melech leaves behind a spy in order to be able to have somebody on his side, on the inside of Avshalom. And so Achitophel tells Avshalom, you know what we need to do is we need to pursue David immediately. While David is on the run and he's exhausted, let's go get him now. And Avshalom listens to the other side and decides he's going to wait until he can gather a whole army, which gives David enough time to settle himself down and regroup. And then eventually David Melech wins the counter-strike and comes back to power. But once Achitophel realizes that his advice is not being listened to, he knows the rebellion is doomed. So what does he do? He saddles his donkey. He gets up and he goes home. Back to his city. And he gives commands to everybody in his house. And he killed himself. Okay, he strangles himself and he commits suicide because he knows that he's in trouble for rebelling against David. So that is the story. Now that all happens, he commits suicide when Shlomo is 7 years old.
What convinced you to be considered as a sin?
Yes. Well, so is rebelling against the king. So is many of the things that he was doing. He was a big tzaddik and David Melech's teacher, and then he went off the derech and got into and wound up going off. So now, ksiv. Now the Basik says, Anshe damim mirma lo yechetzu yemehem. People who are full of blood and trickery, so they will not live half their years. And the David Melech says in Tehillim that a man's full life is 70 years. So therefore, somebody who gets kares who's not going to live half their years doesn't even make it to 35. So he has to die there. He's going to die before he's 35 because he's a bad person. Vitanya. So we learned in a brisa, Kol shenosav shel doeg enon ela shloshim v'arba. Doeg, who was also similarly in trouble because based on his lashon hara, the whole city of Novi or Kohanim gets killed. And Achitofel enon ela shloshim v'shlosh. Achitofel dies when he's 33. He would have died when he was 34, like Doeg, but he committed suicide. So he dies when he's 33. So, Kama havi lahu, tlos and v'tlos, dal sheva, dahava shlomo. So now, let's calculate our way backwards. Achitofel is 33 when he dies. When he dies, Shlomo is 7 years old. So how old was Achitofel when Shlomo was born? Achitofel was 26 years old when Shlomo was born. And remember, now, Achitofel is the great-grandfather of Shlomo. Shlomo's great-grandfather. So he had a great-grandson when he was 26 years old. Okay, that's what they're pointing out. Somehow he's got a great-grandson when he's 26 years old. So let's figure out how old he had to have been when he had kids.
Uh-oh.
So Pashlu Esrim Vishis. Now he's got 26 years old. Dal Tarti Shnei Litlsa Ibure. So you've got 3 pregnancies happening through the 3 generations. So that's 2 years of pregnancies. So so that means there are only 24 years to divide up here. So Ashkechach de Kochan Vechad Betimni Olad. It must be that each of these generations were 8 years old when they had kids. Because only 24 divided by 3 to 3 kids. So that means they were 8. So therefore, that's the proof that in the old days they could have been 8 years old and had kids. So now, Mimai, who says that is really true? Dilmar Tarvayu Betesha Olid. Maybe what's really happened there is that, remember, it's Eliam and Achitofel. Maybe they were both 9 when they had kids. Ubasheva Olida Bishis, and maybe Batsheva, she had children when she was 6. She's a girl, right? Mishom de Itasa Bari, because women can have children when they're younger. Their bodies are stronger. They can have children when they're younger. So maybe she was able to have children at 6 and they had children when they were 9. So it's not a proof that a man can have children when he's 8. Vlad Meikara. You know that because that wasn't even her first kid. Shlomo wasn't even her first child. Remember that when David Melech marries Batsheva, they have a child that dies first. So therefore, she definitely had children before she was 8. Right? Question is how much before? So therefore, we're presuming that she already had children. She was already able to have children from before. It doesn't prove anything about how old men could be when they had children. Ella, so rather the proof that a man could have used to be able to have children when they were 8 comes mehacha from here. Ela toldos terach. These are the generations of Terach. Terach holidas Avram as Nachor ves Haran. So Terach has 3 children: Avram, Nachor, and Haran. The Avram gadol mi Nachor shana. So that means Avraham is older than Nachor, at least a year, right? Because he's got to have a pregnancy in there. So Avram's at least a year older than Nachor. V'Nachor gadol me Haran shana, and Nachor is older than Haran by a year. So that means v'nimtza Avram gadol shtei shana me Haran. That means Avraham is at least 2 years older than Haran, right? Okay, good. Uksiv, now it says, Vayikach Avram v'Nachor lahem noshim. Avram and Nachor get married. Who do they get married to? V'amar Rabbi Yitzchak. So who do they get married to? They get married to Milcah and Yiska, who are the children of Haran. Avraham's wife was his brother Haran's daughter, right? His niece.
I thought he got married to Sarah. That's what I thought.
Yes. So now, Rabbi Yitzchak, Yiska is Sarah. So Yiska and Milcah are his 2 children, and Avram marries Yiska, who is Sarah. V'lama nikra shema Yiska. So if she's Sarah, is Yiska same person? When did
they change the name?
So that's a good question. It sounds like her name really was Sarah, but they had to give her nickname Yiska. What's the nickname Yiska from? Because Shesocha Baruch HaKodesh, because she could see with as a prophetess. The pasuk says, "Kol asher tomar eilecha Sarah shma b'kol la." When Avram doesn't want to send Hagar away, so Hashem says to Avram, everything she says you better listen to. She's a nevuah, so you got to listen to her. Davar acher, another explanation of why they called her Yiska. Shakol sachem v'yofiyah. Everybody was staring at her beauty. Uksiv. Now back into the issue at hand. Vayipol al panav vayitzchak vayomer bilibo. So when Avram is told that he's going to have a son, he says, "Impossible! I'm 100 years old. My wife is 90. So we're going to have children." So Kama koshes Avraham misara. How much older was Avraham than Sarah? So Eser Shnin. Avram was 10 years older than Sarah. Right? So now, the koshish me'avua tartin shnin. We know that he was 2 years older than her father. So if Avram's 2 years older than her father and 10 years older than Sarah, ashkach kiolda Haran l'Sarah betimni. That means that Haran was 8 years old when Sarah was born. Right? So there's your proof. Mimai, who says that that's true? Dilma Avraham zutadachu ahava. Maybe Avram wasn't the older brother. Maybe Avram was the younger brother. So then why is he listed Avraham? Why is he listed first amongst the children of Terach? Because they weren't listing the children in order of their age. The Torah was listing it in terms of their intelligence, their knowledge. And Avram being the smartest of the bunch, he's listed first. Teda, that makes sense. Makes sense that the Torah would do right in that order because the Torah's done it another time. When the pasuk says, "Vayhi Noach ben 500 shana vayoled Noach Hashem es cham ves yafes." By Noach, it says Noach was 500 years old. When Noach was 500 years old, he had 3 children, Shem, Cham, and Yafes, meaning at least his oldest son was born when he was 500 years old. Okay, his oldest son is born when he's 500.
How old was Adam when his sons were born?
One day, right? Because he had, we said that he was born on Erev Shabbos. Remember that the first day of creation. So. Yeah, Adam
that's when he got Eve. Did Adam and Eve have a relation and to have children born from the relationship?
Sorry?
Adam and Eve, didn't they have a relationship to...
When they had children, right, there was no pregnancy, right? We learned that they had children immediately. So, now, Noach, right, he has 3 sons, Shem, Cham, and Yafes. First oldest one's born when? He's 500. Now, Shem Godel Micham Shana, Cham Godel Mi Yafes Shana. The way that it comes out is Shem's the oldest, Cham, and then Yafes, which means that Shem is a year older, 2 years older than Yafes, 1 year older than Cham, 2 years older than Yafes. Nimsa, Shem Godel Mi Yafes, Shtei Shanim. It means that Shem is 2 years older than Yafes. Uksiv. Now the pasuk says, V'noch ben 600 shana, v'amabu haya mayim haaretz. 100 years later, there's a flood. Noach is 600 years old, and the flood is on the ground. Now, Uksiv. Pasuk says later on, Ve'ela toldo Shem. Now let's talk about the generations of Shem. Shem ben me'os shana, when Shem was 100 years old, Vayolod es Arpachshad, he had a son named Arpachshad, Shnasayim achar mabel, 2 years after the flood. So now, ben me'os shana, so what do you mean? He was 100 years old 2 years after the flood? No. If he was born when Noach was 500, and the flood is when he was 600, 2 years later, Shem should be 102, not 100, right? Bar Me'ah v'tartin shnin hava, he was 102. Ella, so rather, no, that's not what's happened. Really, that wasn't the birth order. Shem wasn't born until Noach was 502. At 600, when Noach was 600, so Shem was only 98, 2 years after the flood, he turned 100 and had his own child, Arpachshad. But that means that Shem was not the oldest son. Somebody else was born first. So
we only know the 3 of the 3.
There was one of those 3. Those are the 3 of them, but they were not born in that order. Shem was not the oldest. Okay, that's what it's telling us. The reason why Shem is listed first is because he was the smartest. Like Avram was listed first, Shem is listed first. So that's what's going on over here by Avram, that it is the order of their intelligence. Amar of Kahana. So Rav Kahana says, told this teaching about Noach over in front of Rav Zvid from Narda. He said to him, he says, that's a fair point. You can learn it from there. But we learn also that Shem wasn't the oldest from a different source. Pasuk says, Shem yulad gamhu avi kol bnei Aver, achi Yefes, hagodol. What Pasuk says, Shem also had children. He is the father of all of the children of Aver, the brother of Yefes, right? He's the brother of Yefes Hagodol. So Yefes Hagodol shebe'achiv hava. Yefes was really the oldest, right? Yefes is really the oldest, so therefore the oldest child was really Yefes, not Shem. Elaminalan. So back into the story again. Now, where are we seeing somebody being 8 years old? How do we see that? So Minalan mehocha. Let's talk about from here. Ubitzal ben Uri ben Chur l'mata Yehuda. Who was the one who was involved in the making of the utensils for the Mishkan? Bitzalel, the son of Uri, the son of Chur from Yehuda. Okay, so we know Bitzalel. He has a father Uri. He has a grandfather named Chur. Uksiv, the pasuk says in Divrei Yamim, Vatamas Azuva died, who was the wife of Kalev at the time. Vayikachlo Kalev as Ephras. So Kalev took a new wife named Ephras. Vateled lo as Chur, and from that wife, Kalev had a child named Chur. So therefore, that means that Kalev was Bitzalel's great-grandfather, right? Bitzalel, then Uri, then Chur, then Kalev, right? That's the order? Okay, good. Now, V'chi'ava Bitzalel Mishkan bar Kamahavi. How old was Bitzalel when he made the Mishkan? Bar Tlesar, he was 13 years old. Because it says, Ish mimlachto asher hema osim. Right, when they had to gather together, each man was taken from the work that they were doing. So they were all adults. That's what it means. That means that Bitzalel couldn't have been younger than 13. Bitzalel was 13 when he was building the Mishkan. Vitanya. Now we learn a brisa. Shana Rishona also Moshe Mishkan. So the first year in the Midbar, they made the Mishkan. Shnia Hekim Mishkan. Then the second year, beginning of Nisan, they put the Mishkan up. Vishalach Meraglim, and they sent spies out when they got to Av. They sent spies out. Uksiv, then the pasuk says, Ben arba'im shana anochi b'shalach Moshe eved Hashem. Later on, in Sefer Yeshua, Kalev gets up and he says, when I was 40 years old when Moshe sent the spies. I'm 85 years old now. So he was after 40 years in the desert. Kalev's still alive. He's 85 years old. He was 40 at the time of the Meraglim. Okay, so that's what we know. So he's 40 at the time. So Kamahavi Lahu, our boy. So now let's figure out. The Mishkan was put up. Bitzalel got to work when he was 13. The Mishkan was put up when Bitzalel was 14. And the spies were sent into Eretz Yisrael when Kalev was 40. That means that when the spies went in, Bitzalel was 14. So now, how old was Kalev when Bitzalel was born? So you take away 14 years. So Kamalu Arba'in Dal Arbesar. So you can take 40 minus 14. Dav Bitzalel. So Pashalahu Esrim Vishis. So that's going to put us at 26 years old. So again, Dal Tarti Shnei, the Tilsa Ibure. So we're going to take 2 years off for the pregnancies. Ashtekach Dechochad V'chad Betimni Olid. So that means that Kalev, Chur, and Uri all had children when they were 8. And we can't answer like we did last time by Batsheva that there's a girl in there, so maybe it throws everything off because there were no girls in this calculation. All of them were men. So therefore that shows you that back in those days, they were able to have children when they were 8. Okay, now, next learning is Ben Velo Bas. That a Ben Soramora, we can only have a Ben Soramora, we cannot have a daughter of a Ben Soramora. Tanya, we learned about Amar Rabbi Shimon says, Bedinhu shetehei bas ru'uya lios ke Ben Soramora. Really, logically should be that a girl should also become a Ben Soramora. However, Ayin Amid Aleph, Shakol Metzuyan Etzla Ba'aver, because if she is going off the derech, it's way more problematic. She needs the money in order to be able to buy more meat and more wine. She can get into prostitution and all kinds of averos. So definitely she should be included. However, Elegzeris Akosov, who Ben Velobas just happens to say the Torah says, not so. Even though logically it would make sense, Torah said no, there's no such thing as a Bas Soramor or a Ben Soramora. Says next Mishnah. Me'emasai Chayev. At what point is this person going to be chayev for becoming a ben soromora? Mishayochel tartemar basar, when he eats a tartemar of meat, v'yishtachatzi lug yayin, and eats a half a lug, drinks a half a lug of wine ha'italki, which is something that is very delicious, and he's likely to continue.
Half a lug, we read like half a bottle.
So half a lug. So I looked up what, right, a half a lug. So a revius lug is 2 to 3 ounces or so. So therefore, that's a quarter of a lug. Half a lug then becomes about 6 to 8 ounces, and so that's only half a lug is like 6 to 8 ounces. It's not a lot. It wasn't as much. I asked ChatGPT how much a tartamar was, and it told me that it was about 8 ounces of meat. So also half a pound.
Do you believe everything she tells you?
No, but I have to say something, right? I had to have some kind of source. So therefore, it's. Well, I always think about it as a huge. It's a burger. That's right, a burger and a glass of wine. Yeah, exactly. Rabbi Yossi says, "Mane basar velog yain." He says it's more a mane of meat and a log of wine. So, achol bechaburas mitzvah. However, let's say the person eats. Let's say this child eats, and he has this food at a bar mitzvah celebration, some kind of mitzvah celebration. Achol be'ibar chodesh. There was a feast for the Ibur chodesh, for the extra day of the month. Achol maser sheni b'Yerushalayim. Let's say he eats maser sheni in Yerushalayim. Achol nevelus, or let's say the other way around. He eats food he's not allowed to eat. He eats nevelus, trephos, shkotzim v'ramasim. He eats non-kosher meat. He eats bugs. He eats creepy crawly things. He eats tevel or meiser rishon shelo notcher trumasa, or he eats tevel which doesn't have the trumos and meisers taken off of it. The food that was given to a Levi that they didn't take off truma from it, or meiser sheni or hektish that was not redeemed. Achol davar shehu avera. He eats anything that it's a mitzvah to eat, or he eats something that is an avera to eat. Then achol kol machol velo achol basar, or let's say he eats some other food but not meat. Shasa kol mashke velo shasa yain. He drinks some other beverage that's not wine. Eino nasa ben sorma. That's not a ben soramora. It has to be, off, not relating to a mitzvah or an avera. Ad sheyochel basar v'yishta yain has to be until he eats meat and drinks wine. Shenemar, the pasuk says, zolel v'solei. He has to be gluttonous and a drunkard, right? So he has to be those things. V'yafal pisha in raya l'davar, even though there's no proof. Zecher l'davar, we can remember it like this. Shenemar, pasuk says, al tehi besove yayin bezole basar lamo, right? You shouldn't be those. Gluttony refers to meat, and drunkardness.
Alcoholic, right? Drunkard.
It's even more than alcoholic, right? Because that doesn't necessarily prove drunkenness means wine, because you can get drunk on other beverages besides wine, but it means wine because that's the more addictive. That's what he's going to go after, his tastes. Okay, says the Gemara. Amar Reb Zeir says, Tartemar ze enio demo. I don't know what a tartemar is. I don't know how much that is. El mitoch shekafel Rabbi Yossi biyayin, but we can figure it out. Because Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah says that the amount of wine that you can have is 1 log, while the Tanakama says half a log, which means that Rabbi Yossi is double the volume of whatever the Tanakama says. So therefore, he's kofel af bebasar, so therefore we're going to double the amount of meat as well. So since Rabbi Yossi is saying the amount of meat that you can't have is a mana of meat, that means v'nimtzar tartemar a chatzi mana. That means that tartemar is half of a mana. Right? Makes logical sense. Amar Reb Chanan bar Molda. Reb Chanan bar Molda says, Amar Rav Huna name Rav Huna, Eno chayav ad sheikach basar bezol v'yochel b'yayin bezol. He's got to be able to buy this meat cheap. He's got to be able to buy this wine cheap. V'yishta, and he drinks it. The pasuk says, Zolel v'sovei, is gluttonous and he is drunkard. Amar Rav Chanan bar Molda, and Amar Rav Huna, Rav Chanan bar Molda says in the name of Rav Huna, Eno chayav ad sheyochel basar chai. He has to be able to eat the meat raw. V'yishta yayin chai, and he drinks the wine undiluted. Is that true? V'hal Rabbi v'Rav Yosef Damri Taveh, both Rabbi and Rav Yosef say the opposite. Achel basar chai v'shasa yayin chai. If he eats the meat raw, he drinks the wine raw. Eino nasa ben soramer. He's not a ben soramer. Why? Because his behavior has to be something that he's going to want to do again. And so if he eats raw meat or drinks raw wine, undiluted wine, he's not going to do that again. That's not pleasurable. So therefore, that wouldn't apply to Ben Soramora. Amar Ravina says, Yayin chai, mazig velo mazig, basar chai, basha velo basha. What we mean is that the wine that is undiluted means that it's wine that is partially diluted, which makes it exceptionally strong, but still tasty. And also, it's rare meat, right? It's cooked, but not totally cooked. Kibasar kiva de achli ganvi. It's like the rare meat that is eaten by thieves, right? So it's a good place to stop.
Okay.